Welcome to Signals and Stories, 10 Years with the Vertex Project, a limited series exploring how cyber threat intelligence has evolved over the past decade. In each episode, we break down how analysts actually investigate, covering the data and the decisions that shape real-world intelligence. Stay tuned. Well, hello and welcome to our limited series. We are doing 10 episodes to represent 10 years since the Vertex Project opened its doors. I'm Callie Fencl, and today I'm sitting down with analysts from the Vertex Project, Ryann Hallback, aka Ryann, Jennifer Kolde, aka thesilence, and Mary Beth, aka Savage. Welcome everybody to the show. Do you want to take a quick moment to introduce yourselves?
I'm Jennifer Kolde. Many of you may know me by thesilence, which is my handle at the Vertex Project. I've been in Intel and security and computer stuff for like 25 years now, which is a really long time. I go way back with most of these folks on the call, like back to our old Mandiant days, doing stuff like APT1 and doing cool reporting, and then coming over to the Vertex Project to work on Synapse. So happy to be here, Callie. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ryann, aka Rayne. Like Callie said, I joined the Vertex Project in 2018, I believe. And similar to Jen, I've been in cybersecurity for a little over 20 years now, which is insane to say. I initially started out working in the federal government space, so Department of Defense, and then I transferred over to the private sector where I met these ladies. So you know, got my feet introduced at IBM, also Mandiant, and that's where I met these two and also the co-founders, Vivian with it.
My name's Mary Beth. My handle is Savage. I have been working in CTI area for at least a decade, a couple more years. I originally started out with Mandiant way back, and I was fortunate enough to work with the Silence and Rain and Busy and Whippet and some other people who are now members of the Vertex Project. And I came over to Vertex in 2019, and I've been here since.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you all being here today. I'm excited to talk to you all today. You all had extensive experience tracking threats in your careers, and at the Vertex Project, you all have been working on challenges and workshops built for other analysts. And you three were working on one for PivotCon prior to this mini series airing. And in creating that workshop, you came up with notes and observations. And I'd just like to dive into those because I'm not sure analysts get a chance to pause and ask themselves these questions. So, you noted there's been a shift in how reporters talk about threats. Can we start there? Like how has that changed in the past 10 years?
I can kind of kick it off. I don't know, like past 10 years, one of the things I'll say, just to kind of take it back, one of the things that got me interested in Mandiant, particularly was the APT1 report that Jen worked on. And I think at that time, like that was reporting, right? For me, that got me really interested in not only working there, but I think it was the first time that, let's say, a nation state had been doxxed, right? And I think that kind of set the stage for what reporting would look like. It kind of started this blueprint, if you will, because you saw interest, you had news coverage, and it kind of started to fill people's sales pipeline, I would say. And because of that, people kind of took that blueprint and they started to use it. And I think with reporting, you started to see reporting more so look like that versus it just being like, hey, there's a 0 day out there, or Patch Tuesday. It kind of changed a little bit. So we're starting to see threat actors like named, it's like sensationalized a little bit. That's what I've seen change the most, right? Is this need to make everything about the victims, about how sophisticated the actors are, or about what they're actually doing for impact, because that just makes the company's brand look good, so to speak. Not always a bad thing, but that's something that I've noticed a lot in reporting from 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think there's definitely that marketing twist to it. I think some of the other things that have changed, it's kind of interesting because we're working on another workshop where we're going back and literally looking at reports from like 15 years ago. So not only how has it changed in 10 years, but how has it changed throughout kind of a lot of the history of threat intel. And way back in the day, a lot of reporting was focused around malware. It was around detection. It goes back to the old antivirus days. So what is this new tool that we saw and how is it being used? Early reporting didn't include a lot of indicators because people weren't really tracking that and didn't think it was important. And I think what slowly changed is we focused more on things that can be used for detection and correlation. So how can I link this to other things that I'm seeing? But I think the other big shift has been an ongoing recognition that the threat landscape is a lot more complicated than we thought back in our innocent days, right? So we used to just lump a lot of activity together, where we've really come to understand that the landscape is a lot more complicated and a lot more subtle than we gave it credit for, which has some interesting impacts when you look back at that historical reporting that we're building on, while recognizing that a lot of that early reporting was not maybe as refined as it could have been. And how does that impact, what we're seeing and what we're building on today?
I think there's also in the reporting that we've seen most recently is that there's much more of an integration between activity that we're seeing on networks, on compromised hosts, and things like that, with kind of what's going on in the larger world. Like, I feel like there's more of a breakdown between what we consider to be cyber activity or a cyber attack um, than I feel like previously it was very much there are all these notions of like cyber war as if that was going to be its own isolated event and not introduced as part of like supporting actual like physical activity or other measures. And I feel like now that's become much more nuanced that this is part of an operation. It might be influenced by these things. It's also in support of these other events that are going on. So it's a little bit more, um, I think, relevant to the entire like environment in which it's taking place. Um, One of the things that I feel like we're also seeing is, or that I also wonder about when we talk about the really early reporting that where it started out focusing on malware, is that like one of the like the APT1 report was not like one of the big initial reports that focused it on attribution to the actors. I think HP Gary was earlier in that, and I wonder if it was not only because companies were so much more focused on detection as like that was their product and that what they're doing. But like the HP Gary incident where, if I remember correctly, they said that they were going to expose Anonymous did not go well for HP Gary. And that's like part of the reason why people really backed off on focusing, or if that influenced or caused people to back off on focusing on who are the actual operators, instead focusing on things like malware, in addition to like that was the data that they had readily available. Because unless you were somebody like a state intelligence apparatus or something, like you probably didn't have the data or the visibility to be able to say, we also are able to say that this activity is traced back to these actual operators who are behind it. Now, when I feel like you're looking at the amount of data that is available, that it's not only us pulling from malware detection or us looking at infrastructure, but we're able to kind of leverage everything that we see, even just in open source on the internet, and be able to say, this is associated with this account, or like this is associated with this social media profile and this person. And we can see the things that they've done in the past. We can link them back to their, like social media profiles on this job site and see that they were associated with these companies. Maybe they're interested in this thing, and it looks like they probably have these interests. And so this activity that they're engaging in is not only like they're not over here doing like cyber operations for the sake of doing cyber operations, but they have this entire background that's kind of focusing on or kind of influencing their viewpoint and their skill set. Or maybe they work for this company that is involved in this area in whatever conflict is going on, or has like these business interests, or um, is somehow integrated into current events. And that's also all a part of what's going on and kind of influencing their activity. We're no longer seeing cyber operations in quite a background, in quite a vacuum rather. And that's also coming across in how we talk about it in reporting. That was a very long and convoluted answer.
No.
It's what we do. We're analysts, MB.
It depends.
It always depends.
Is what I'm learning. Is it depends. And then
Everything depends.
you launch into the explanation.
Yeah. Let me give you the 15 possible options for what might be, behind what you're asking me about.
But that was actually you had gone into like one of the other questions I had, which was, in the past 10 years, would you say the pressure for attribution has lessened, or would you say otherwise? And it sounds like it is lessening, if I'm understanding correctly, or did I just not understand that the monologue?
It depends. I think what we see now, well, I feel like there was initially, this is all going off of my memory of like early reporting around when the APT1 report came out. Like as I remember it, there was HB Gary, which was several years, I think, before. There's APT1 report. And then I think immediately after the APT1 report, I want to say that it was CrowdStrike who came out with the APT2 report. And they kind of followed a very similar high level format in that they were trying to point to specific operators. And so I wonder if there is kind of a reaction of like, this is how you do reporting when you release it to the public, as opposed to reporting if it's like an internal incident report that you're sending to your customer of like, this is what happened in your network that we saw in your investigation. Um, I feel like since then there's a lot more nuance in like the conversation of what attribution means and what that entails. And I think critically, um, for whom does attribution matter and to what extent? I think like if you're a policymaker, you need to know the details because you need to know like, how is this happening? How is, for example, like economic theft, why is it happening? Who is doing this? Like who's going after all of the companies in the US or like the major companies? Why is it happening? And is this state funded or is this, solely criminal, or is this like the silence in her basement, doing her weekend activities? Because you want to have the information so that you can create policy to combat it or to address it. However, if I'm a random individual, maybe I don't care about that level of detail. And I think it also depends on like if I'm a company who's just trying to protect their networks, it might be more relevant for me to know like this is the activity, this is how I can detect it, this is what they're going after to the extent that I can identify like, am I a target? Like where are my areas of vulnerability? Is my supply chain impacted? But I don't necessarily, it's kind of above my pay grade to know, is this conducted by, unit XYZ of somebody's military, or is this like who's actually the fingers on the keyboard? And um, like maybe it's interesting, but it's not necessarily what I need to know to protect my network. But then you get into things like now what we know about all of the like financial crime and like how that works. And if I am a threat analyst and I'm tasked with breaking down those threats and being able to build off that activity, I'm not necessarily protecting myself or maybe not even protecting a company. Like maybe like I'm just part of the kind of like supply chain of that particular threat intel. And I'm charged with tracking them. Like I do need to know probably like the nuances of who's the supplier, what is their relationship to the operators. Is there somebody who's just selling this kit that they're using, or is it something that they're building and using themselves, or is it a shared tool, or is it publicly available? So I feel like that's something that's kind of come out in the last 10 years, at least that I've noticed, is that we started off with there was kind of like this, what I kind of see as like a knee jerk reaction of like, this is what this big intel report looks like. We should do this way. And then kind of a more nuanced of like, one, not everybody has the visibility to be able to do something like that, especially in all cases, depending on the level of activity is. Also, like your audiences for that information are going to vary. Like some of them, they need that level of detail, and some people, they don't need it, and it's not relevant to them.
I'm
Another
surprised.
long convoluted answer.
No,
I'm
Savage.
surprised.
I was
Go
just gonna
ahead.
say Savage is the one that wanted to do this the least.
Yeah.
We're just going to sit here and let Mary Beth answer all the questions. I'm surprised it took us 10 whole minutes to get to it depends, but that is the answer to a lot of things. And what's interesting about the attribution question, I think in some ways the pressure is actually more, but potentially for the wrong reasons. And I think one of the unfortunate effects of the APT1 report. And I love, MB, that you called it the APT2 report and not the Putter Panda report, because that shows a little
Right.
bit of where we're coming from in the background. But regardless of the reasons why we did that, right? Like internally, the people that worked on that report, from the threat intel team to the developers to the folks who were collating the IOCs and going through the data so that we could include stuff in that report, like we were fed up with watching that activity happen. And the desire was to out that and say in a way that the government at that time could not, this is what's happening and this is who's behind it, and people need to pay attention. Um, for better or for worse, right? Mandiant was I don't remember, we weren't publicly traded at the time, but they are a commercial company, right? They have to make money. And that was leveraged, by our marketing team, right or wrong, right? To promote the work that a lot of people put into that report. And that idea of attribution and naming and shaming and calling out and saying like, hey, we have the resources to point a finger and say who's behind it, that kind of got picked up by a lot of commercial firms, right? And as commercial companies, you have shareholders, you have stakeholders. At the very least, you're out to make a profit, and that got leveraged. Frequently, the Intel team was not internally to the company making money. The company did something else, but they had an Intel team to support that. But those types of reports got leveraged. So I think that added the pressure to be able to put a cool, sexy name on the activity that you were seeing. And I think that pressure still exists in a lot of cases, right or wrong. And MB made a lot of good points as, who does attribution matter to? What audience is that important to? And they care about that for whatever reason. And I think something that as analysts, we don't do often enough is kind of take a step back and ask ourselves, why are we doing what we're doing? And that's obviously like a very big, almost existential question to you if you're an analyst, but really, who's my audience, and what is this work intended to support? Like, what's the outcome, or what's the, the application of what I'm doing? And given that end goal, for my immediate tasking, does attribution matter to that? And I don't think we ask that often enough, or maybe reflect on that often enough.
Given me a lot to think about, Jen.
Oh, that's okay. We'll let poor Ryann jump in if she wants to also add her thoughts
No, I think
while Kelly formulates her next question.
no, I definitely agree with your sentiments. I think it does matter, but it just depends on the context, right? So if it's something that needs to be put out quickly, right? If it's something where you can actually take action against the person that's doing the thing, sure, do it. But to your point, Jen, just doing it for the sake of sales, just doing it for the sake of this is fun, right? It's catchy. I think that's where it gets lost. And I think it's had at times, unfortunately, a negative impact in that there's such a desire to name a thing that sometimes things are named incorrectly. And sometimes it's actually correlated with other activity incorrectly versus just saying, hey, we see a thing. You need to know about it. You need to be able to detect it, protect yourselves. And so that can lead people in directions that's not the right direction. But I do think it's important. It's a time and a place for everything.
Well, I think too, just like thinking about like the marriage between like research and reporting, like the media reporting and marketing of it all. It's like we're in an industry that prides itself on collaboration. So we want to be able to share what we're working on, but it's like, how do we share? Like, it seems like it's hard to share that with like a news outlet when, they're looking for a hook too. So like they want the cool, sexy name that Jen mentioned, but maybe it's like premature. So it's like, how do we all get on the same page, or like how do analysts get on the same page of sharing your work that might be incomplete at the time. It might not be like, maybe it doesn't deserve to be newsworthy at a certain point. It's newsworthy to the community, but it's not newsworthy to the world at large. But it's like, how do we better get on the same page of, we don't exactly know what this is yet, but it's important that we talk about it so we can move forward with what we're working on. Do you have thoughts on that?
Mm.
I would add an additional wrinkle to that is that um, there's also the element of like, how do you decide that this is activity that you don't entirely know what it is or what's going on, but it's reached the level of, I guess, alarm for you or your organization internally that you feel like it's important to notify people. But then there's also the pressure of like, are you potentially disrupting some of like law enforcement's ability to identify and track and potentially act against the perpetrators, which depending on your partnerships with whatever law enforcement entity might be doing that, like you probably don't have visibility into, or you might not be aware. And everybody also has their own goals. Like, is it to protect your customers? Like you're trying to protect your customers, so you want them to know about this, versus say law enforcement might be, we want to be able to get enough evidence that we can bring charges and win a case, which might require us allowing this activity to continue so that we're able to complete our investigation, even if it means that there are additional victims in that time frame.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the challenge with this industry is it's really just it kind of it's like a microcosm, right? Especially if you look in, let's say, the government space as well. As analysts, and I even still have to 20 years later constantly work to shift my mindset. We have aliases for a reason. You work under, let's say, assumed names, right? That has historical context. By our sheer nature, by the potential implications of something getting exposed, you don't just openly share. And I think some people come from that mindset. It's out of safety. I think Envy made a good point. If I share this prematurely, how does this affect someone else? So I think in order for us to get in a place where we're sharing and we're able to get on the same page, I think there has to be really an agreement to this cultural shift and even analyst mindset of what is my responsibility. I think you have to really define like what your individual goals are for groups that you're sharing with. And that's what makes it challenging. Everyone has their own goals. And some people have the goals of protecting others. And then unfortunately, some people have the goals of monetization. So that's also another reason, another thing that makes it challenging to share is because you're maybe holding on to this golden nugget for a reason as well. So I just think we have to get some kind of way on the same page, right? And find ways to orient ourselves and put ourselves in groups where we have the same goals and we trust who we will with because this community security trust that's a big thing.
May I pivot slightly?
I see what you did there.
And I'm gonna pivot, and this wasn't on the outline, so but it was in our Slack conversation. I probably should have mentioned this up front in the episode. I'm sure everybody could notice though that this is a group of women. And I think that's really cool to point out. Like this is well, besides myself, you are all female analysts, which is really interesting. Like, can we talk about that a little bit about what you've noticed about female entry into the field in the past 10 years or even since you started in your respective careers, like what's that journey been like? Yeah, like I think that would be really interesting to hear about on my first episode with you guys.
I think it's interesting. I mean, I guess I've been in. I'm the oldest person here, so I've been in the field longer. And definitely, like most people who come into tech, it's largely a male field, and that's true. Still true now. It was very true 25 years ago when I started doing techie things. And it's changing, which is awesome. Like you do hear a lot more diverse voices. When you look at conference presentations and who's up there on stage, there's a much more diverse group than there used to be, but it's still unusual. And I think on the positive side, probably about the time that I started at Mandiant and we were building out the threat intel team there, we were pretty balanced male and female. And that wasn't by design. That just happened to be like the people that we thought were great analysts and we wanted to bring on board. So for better, for worse, about that point in my career, I kind of started taking it for granted that there would just be a lot of women on the team. And that's not true in all cases. yeah, it's been awesome. And I have to kind of remind myself sometime that we are uh, still the minority in a lot of places in the tech industry. And hopefully by, being here and being present, we can show that there is no one single look to an analyst or one single background that, people are supposed to have or bring to the table, and that diversity is ultimately a really good thing.
It's funny that you mentioned the Mandiant team because that was the original team that, like, for me, that I started on the beginning of my career. And I remember there was some like uh, out of work event or get together or something like that where somebody's wife was there, and she was sitting near me, and she just kept going like, "Oh my gosh, are you all at Mandiant? Like, there are so many women. There are so many women here. There are so many women." And she worked for another tech company, and I just was like, "I feel like you are overreacting," because that was my first CTI job, and I was like, "This is like this seems like the standard," but it wasn't. And I went to another team that I went on to, and there were like, four women in a group of 40 or so or something. It was a very different, a very skewed element. And then I noticed like, oh, she had a point. She wasn't just being dramatic. Um, One of the things that I've noticed at some of the conferences that we've started sponsoring and going to over the years is that compared to like the first few years that I went, which would probably be about 5 years ago or so now, um, you do see a lot more women in the audience. So that has helped. They are primarily younger. So I feel like it's more people who are like starting their careers and or students that are interested that are coming to these conferences. Um, there are, elements of the culture that I feel like are still, even if we don't intend to, are very much like coded heavily male. Um, but I think that's something that with us being more aware, maybe we can catch ourselves and be a little bit more balanced in the things that we kind of promote, even if it's unintentionally, um, and just have a little bit more diversity in how we present ourselves or communicate, like who is an analyst or who can be an analyst or what an analyst might look like or do or what kind of background they might come from.
Ooh, I feel like this is all good fodder for Rayne, who is, by the time this comes out, she will have done career day at school. But it's like, who can be an analyst? Like, this is like
Oh,
really good for the youth to hear.
no, yeah, I think that's true. It's funny hearing MB talk about the conferences. I remember I went to my first DEF CON conference. This was like mid 2000s, and I could count, I feel like on one hand, the number of women that I saw. And I remember how that made me feel. I also remember working for the government, and I remember serving in the particular role at that time. And I showed up to do a thing, and someone thought I was there for something else. Just how could you, whatever they saw, I'm not sure, be here for this thing because it was male dominated. So I remember how that made me feel. And I distinctly remember how I felt walking into the mandated spaces and seeing so many women, and not just women, but brilliant women and women who were like welcoming, right? We just have like a good community. And I think like Jen and MB said, it is lost upon me how um it's not common, right? Because this is my day to day. I've been here since 2018. Excuse me. So this is who I get to work with. But I think it's important because it is a male dominated industry. There are a lot of insinuations and different things I still do not get. I remember doing analysis one time, and there were, let's say, certain names throughout a piece of malware. I had no clue what it meant, right? But then one of my male counterparts are like, "Oh, this is this video game," and I'm like, "How? I didn't know that," right? And so, unfortunately, they have a leg up because of the subculture that exists within this space. But I definitely value the subculture that we're creating, right? Just having a presence because I think it's important to be representative, as representative as possible. So
And I think one of the
There's
nice things about Mandiant too was we didn't just have women in the analyst roles, we had women in leadership roles. So if you go back to that original threat intel team, that was started by Joyce Lynn. And she has had an incredible influence on the way a lot of the industry does intelligence. And some of the folks that go way back remember her and recognize that. I think the industry is old enough now that some of that's gotten lost in time. But, we had a lot of women in top roles there. We had Laura Galante, we had Jen Whedon, we had Nalani Fraser. We had a lot of really brilliant male colleagues as well. But we had that balance that I think a lot of other people didn't. Um, I think tech in some areas is much more about the ability, and people will look at you and say, what can you do? And, can you walk the walk? And they'll respect that regardless of who you are. So it's not about, your particular gender or your background or whatever. But I think that representation does matter in terms of just showing people coming up in the field or people coming into the industry who can sit at the table, right? Who can fill these roles.
It's interesting because there's, like, on one hand, thinking back to those early Mandiant days, like, because that was the first place that I really started, like, I knew that I was like, oh, I have these great coworkers that are really brilliant. But then, like, now, years later, realizing like who those people actually were, because to me, that was like, this is my cool coworker. And then you're like, oh my gosh, you were this person who did all these things. Um, it's kind of, you mentioned that, like, oh, like over the years, like things have kind of gotten lost to time. But then it's like, also like over the years, like you realize like, oh, that's who my coworker was. Like, that's pretty cool.
I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about this online, but talking about, who's in the field. Um, One thing that I know all of us from back channel conversations agree on is that the whole industry is made better by a broader range of perspectives. And that's not just like icky group hug language, right? It's literally true. Like intelligence, we're supposed to make assessments. We're supposed to come to conclusions. We're supposed to advise decision makers on things that, impact a company or a country or a customer base. And all of us, right, we're subject to confirmation bias. We're subject to tunnel vision. We're subject to continuing to kind of reinforce expectations that we already have, especially if we're under time pressure to crank out some kind of intelligence. So having somebody whose background is different, for whatever definition of different you use, who can look at that with fresh eyes and say, but did you consider this, right? Because they're bringing a new perspective to it. It makes us all better. I think sometimes we resist that because it means that in some cases I'm going to be wrong. And in a field, I guess, where there is that pressure to produce and produce correctly and get it right and come up with those brilliant insights, that can feel like a failing, which it is absolutely not. It's the absolute nature of what we do, right? We're making assessments with incomplete data, and sometimes we'll get it right and sometimes we don't. But that ability to have people with different perspectives, wherever that perspective comes from, who can question those things and kind of push all of us collectively to continually reevaluate and revisit our conclusions is really critical to our field. I think I soapboxed there. I'm sorry.
No, well said. Well
What a
said.
podcast is. Podcasting is just soapboxing as far as I'm concerned. Since you have had this experience like building your careers and working with the Vertex Project for the past, how like, well, Jen, you just hit 9 years, which is really cool. Um, what what are the attributes you think that are the best for an analyst to be able to succeed given the way that things have been changing?
I would add critical thinking ability as like probably the first one. We talk about that quite a bit, just in general. The, but I think with what Jen just pointed out, with the what helps with diversity when you have diversity points is like one of those aspects is somebody who is able to come in and say, did you consider this? Or even if it's look at things with a not necessarily a critical eye, but like a different perspective. And I think if you critical thinking is also a way that you can do that, for yourself, but also for somebody else. Question like, is this sufficiently supported by the data? Is it well communicated? Things like that. So that's probably the first one that I would know.
Yeah, I think it's a great one. Definitely worth like being number one up there. Some attributes I think about are being inquisitive, having a passion to learn, being okay with being wrong, and I would say being adaptable. I think your job as an analyst is to get it right, but you have to recognize that you have to take risks first and being willing to be wrong. Also, in our field, it may be a little bit different from other fields in that really things change at a rapid pace. Like you're talking about, you have to know changing with the pace of how technology changes. So we've gone from just threat actors using your typical run of the mill computers to hack something to maybe using a thermostat to using AI to write code on the fly to using cloud models to exfil data, whatever it may be. You have to learn new technologies, understand the way the world works, and be willing to learn because it's not stagnant at all. And just the way that actors operate, things always change. So you can't really be beholden to one assessment, right? Because um, it really changes by the day.
I think those are all really good qualities. And to build on that a little bit, I would say imagination, from the standpoint of one of the things that we are supposed to try to do as analysts is, if you're officially from the Intel background, right? Alternate competing hypotheses, right? This is how I reasoned my way to this conclusion, but can I think creatively about alternative explanations and kind of test those against my conclusion to see if I really think that it's correct? Um, a conversation that I feel comes up pretty frequently in the community is, would you rather take somebody with a technical background who knows how OAuth works and who knows the ins and outs of computer systems and reverse engineering and train that technical person to be an analyst? Or would you rather take someone with critical thinking skills and curiosity and good communication skills and train them in the technical aspects? And it's not black and white, um, but I think it's easier to teach somebody technical skills than it is to teach them critical thinking. Not that it can't be done, but having that background for me, if I were hiring somebody, which I'm not currently, but um, having that curiosity and that critical thinking and that willingness to learn and those communication skills gives me more to build on. That okay, I have this really technical background, but I've never thought through the analysis side. That's one opinion, which whatever, but I do hear that conversation a lot.
All right. Well, we're just getting down to time of our recording time, so I don't want to keep you guys too long. There's a lot of questions I didn't get to ask today, but that's okay. There's 10 episodes of this, so I can just carry them over into the next episode.
And
Um,
analysts are notoriously long-winded. Like you ask us a question and we could have given you a 12-word answer, but we'll give you 15 paragraphs.
I know, but that's why I was like, this is great podcast fodder. So yeah, is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with for today before we exit?
I can't believe we've been doing this for 10 years. Um, the time goes by really fast, but just like so many good memories with the team. All of us have had, careers that have extended beyond just the Vertex project. But it's been a little surprising to realize that we managed to hit the 10-year mark, and kind of look back on that because the time went by really fast, but it's been a great ride.
I guess before like just one last question, like just thinking about that, Jen, like are there any mentors that you'd like to thank for getting you to where you are that you've met along the way in the past 10 years?
I think the people who've challenged me, and I think the person who challenged me most was actually Joyce. And I started in threat intel really early, right? My first official threat intel job was with the FBI. I was a computer scientist for them. And it was back in the early days of just figuring out like China was doing bad things and this might be a problem. And like many people in that time period, I was the subject matter expert within my organization, and nobody questioned my analysis because I was absolutely brilliant. It was just that's the way it was. And I came over to Mandiant, and Joyce was in charge of the team, and she was very much explain it to me. Why did you come to this conclusion? Why do you think this? And she was constantly questioning me, drove me absolutely nuts. when I first started working with her, right? Because we all have those little egos. Um, but she made me recognize the value in that, right? If I can't defend my conclusions, if I can't explain how I got there, that's a problem. And I'm not always right, right? That idea that you weren't the lone expert sitting in the corner cranking out intelligence on the thing you knew best, right? You were part of a team, and part of the interaction with that team is questioning each other and pushing each other and challenging each other and requiring all of us collectively to take that extra step. So at that point in my career, she really had a huge influence on me and how I approach the discipline. Something that she kind of drilled into us is that no matter how new you are in the field, like you may be the most recent hire on the team, you may be fresh out of college and starting your career, you have every right to question the most senior person here. Not in a belligerent, nasty kind of way, but it's not like, oh, that person's been doing this a long time, I can't possibly question what they're doing. Is that debate is an inherent part of our field, and we should embrace that because it makes us all better. So she had a big impact on me.
That's awesome.
It is awesome.
All right. Well, I think we're all set for today. But there's going to be other episodes with you guys, so I'm excited about that.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you, Rayne, The Silence, and Savage for being here today. I hope that everybody is going to tune into our next episode of the limited series. We're going to be joined by the analysts again from the Vertex Project. We're going to talk about how analysts actually investigate, and maybe we'll stay on topic. I don't know. I hope we don't. I like to go down rabbit holes.
It depends.
It depends.
It depends.
Damn it, I should have called this podcast series It Depends.
Funny.
But that's okay. But anyway, thank you for being here, ladies. We will be talking again soon. And to our listeners, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Callie.
Thanks for listening to Signals and Stories. If you found this episode useful, be sure to follow the series and share it with your team. For more on how the Vertex Project approaches intelligence, from data modeling to real investigations, visit vertex.link. We'll see you in the next episode.